Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about a major issue that's shaking up the situation in Eastern Europe. Russia is facing a logistics nightmare after the failure of its critical land bridge. This story goes far beyond a damaged route. It's about the collapse of an entire supply system that has been keeping Russian operations moving. The consequences stretch across military strategy, economic stability, and even Russia's political standing. So, let's break it down carefully and understand what's really going on. The so-called land bridge is the corridor that connects mainland Russia with Crimea and the occupied parts of southern Ukraine. It's not just one road or one rail line, it's a complex network of infrastructure routes that allow fuel, ammunition, food, and troops to move between the Russian heartland and the war zones. This connection has been vital to maintaining control and supplying operations in Ukraine's south. Without it, Russia's ability to fight and sustain itself on that front becomes severely limited. For months, there have been warning signs that this corridor was under pressure. Ukrainian attacks have repeatedly targeted bridges, railway hubs, and depots. Satellite imagery has shown traffic slowing, trains halting, and rerouting happening across secondary lines. When analysts say the land bridge failed, what they mean is that the entire logistical capacity of that route has dropped below a functional threshold. It's no longer serving as a reliable, high-volume supply chain. The immediate trigger was another round of attacks that hit infrastructure along the route, particularly near the Crimean Bridge, also known as the Kerch Bridge. This bridge has always been symbolic for Moscow, connecting Russia directly to Crimea. It was supposed to be proof of Russia's permanent control over the peninsula. Now, after repeated strikes and reports of damage, it's become a symbol of vulnerability. Russia's own sources have admitted that heavy military cargo is no longer being sent through the bridge. This is not just about one piece of infrastructure breaking down. The Russian military machine depends on logistics, and logistics depend on predictability. If fuel doesn't arrive on time, tanks stop moving. If ammunition trucks can't pass, artillery becomes silent. Every delay on the road has a multiplying effect at the front lines. The Russian army has learned this the hard way since the early days of the invasion. But the failure of the land bridge makes the problem systemic. Let's imagine the situation on the ground. Supplies that used to move straight from depots in southern Russia into Crimea or occupied Zaporizhia now have to take longer, more dangerous routes. Trucks and trains must detour hundreds of kilometers. Each extra mile means more fuel consumed, more maintenance, and more exposure to attack. Drones, long-range missiles, and sabotage teams are constantly watching those roads. Every time Russia tries to rebuild, Ukraine strikes again. The scale of the problem becomes clearer when we think about the kind of war Russia is fighting. This is a conflict that consumes huge amounts of ammunition and fuel every single day. Modern artillery battles require thousands of shells, and each shell weighs dozens of kilograms. Transporting that volume of material needs steady, protected, and high-capacity routes. When one of those routes collapses, the entire chain strains. It's not easy to replace. In the early phase of the war, Russia tried to rely on railway logistics. Trains can move massive quantities efficiently, but railways need bridges, stable lines, and secure nodes. Once the bridge to Crimea and the connecting lines were damaged, Russia had to rely more on trucks. Trucking over long distances in a war zone is a logistical nightmare. Roads are vulnerable, vehicles break down, and fuel trucks are prime targets. It's an expensive and inefficient substitute. The ripple effects go beyond transportation. When supplies slow down, field units start rationing. Soldiers receive less fuel and fewer shells. Commanders become cautious, and the rhythm of operations changes. A lack of logistics doesn't just limit fighting, it limits decision making. That's why analysts call logistics the invisible backbone of war. When the backbone breaks, even the strongest armies can falter. There's also a psychological factor. The land bridge to Crimea was a source of pride for Russia. President Putin personally opened it in 2018, presenting it as proof of integration and permanence. Seeing it fail undermines the narrative of strength. For Russian soldiers stationed in Crimea and southern Ukraine, knowing that their main supply lifeline is unreliable can be demoralizing. For Ukrainian forces, it's a morale boost, a sign that their strikes are working. From a strategic viewpoint, the land bridge failure puts Russia in a difficult position. It must choose between defending the remaining routes or launching new offensives to secure others. Both require resources. Protecting logistics means deploying more troops to guard convoys and infrastructure, which reduces manpower at the front. Trying to capture new routes risks overextension. It's a lose-lose dilemma that weakens operational flexibility. At the same time, rebuilding or rerouting supply lines is costly and slow. Engineers need time, materials, and relative safety to repair bridges or build temporary replacements. But Ukraine's drone and missile campaigns keep disrupting those efforts. Even if Russia restores partial traffic, it's often under constant threat. A single missile can undo weeks of repair. That uncertainty makes long-term planning nearly impossible. We should also remember that Russia's logistics system was never perfect to begin with. Long before the war, military experts pointed out inefficiencies in the Russian supply structure. Much of it was built around peacetime assumptions, with centralized depots and slow-moving bureaucracy. Once the war demanded high speed and flexible logistics, those weaknesses became glaring. The land bridge was supposed to mask those flaws, providing a stable artery of movement. Now that it's gone, the old inefficiencies are exposed again. Let's look at the economic layer of this problem. Every supply failure adds cost. Extra fuel, longer routes, vehicle losses, all of that drains resources. The Russian economy, already under pressure from sanctions, now has to absorb higher military expenses just to maintain existing operations. It's like running an engine that burns more fuel to go the same distance. Over time, it's unsustainable. On the industrial side, the strain affects factories and depots. When front-line units can't receive supplies on schedule, production and storage schedules are disrupted too. Warehouses fill up with stock that can't be shipped efficiently. Transportation bottlenecks ripple backward through the system. Eventually, even manufacturing becomes slower because logistics can't keep up. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues to use this to its advantage. Targeting logistics is a smart way to fight a larger opponent. Instead of directly engaging Russia's massed forces, Ukraine aims to cut the supply lines feeding them. Each successful strike creates shortages and delays that weaken Russian performance on the battlefield. The land bridge failure proves that this strategy works. It's asymmetric warfare at its finest. For Ukraine's Western allies, this development is also significant. It shows that continued support for precision weapons and intelligence sharing can produce strategic effects. When a single strike can choke off an entire corridor, the cost-benefit ratio tilts sharply in Ukraine's favor. That encourages more coordinated targeting campaigns and keeps Russia constantly off balance. Now, let's talk about geography. The terrain between southern Russia and Crimea is challenging for logistics. There are limited crossing points over rivers, marshlands, and the Sea of Azov. Bridges and causeways are natural choke points. Once a bridge is damaged, there aren't many alternative routes nearby. That's why each strike has such a dramatic impact. The region's infrastructure wasn't built to handle multiple high-capacity military lines simultaneously. Weather also plays a role. During winter, frozen ground and snow slow down transport. In spring and autumn, muddy conditions known locally as Rasputitsa make unpaved roads impassable. When the main asphalt routes are destroyed or blocked, there's little flexibility. Trucks get stuck, convoys move slower, and the whole system becomes even more fragile. In addition to geography and weather, there's the factor of distance. Russia's supply lines stretch hundreds of kilometers from its main depots. The longer the distance, the more vehicles and drivers are needed to sustain throughput. Every added kilometer multiplies fuel requirements and maintenance costs. It's one of the basic laws of logistics. Distance kills efficiency. Russia's military planners are surely aware of this. That's why they placed so much emphasis on securing a continuous corridor through southern Ukraine early in the war. The idea was to connect Donbas, Mariupol, and Crimea into a single network that could be supplied easily from the mainland. When that corridor fails, the whole logic of that territorial connection starts to unravel. The consequences are strategic as well as tactical. Strategically, Russia may have to reconsider how it manages its forces in the south. If supplies can't reach easily, it might redeploy some units to other fronts or scale down operations. That could create openings for Ukraine to push forward. Tactically, local commanders will face constant headaches managing shortages. Every battle becomes a calculation about what can be spared and what must be saved. From a broader perspective, this situation highlights the importance of modern logistics in 21st century warfare. Technology has changed the tools of war, but the fundamentals remain the same. Armies still march or stall on their supplies. Drones, missiles, and satellite surveillance have only made logistics more visible and more vulnerable. The side that controls supply chains controls momentum. Another important factor is time. Repairing damaged infrastructure takes time. Even temporary military bridges require equipment and personnel. In wartime, time is often the most valuable resource. Every day that the land bridge remains non-functional is a day when Russian logistics fall further behind. Over weeks or months, that delay can shift the entire balance of power on the battlefield. Inside Russia, the government is trying to downplay the severity of the problem. Official statements often claim that traffic continues normally or that repairs are progressing smoothly, but satellite data, leaked reports, and open-source analysis tell a different story. Train movements have dropped sharply, convoys are smaller, and civilian traffic is restricted. The scale of disruption is too big to hide indefinitely. Public perception matters too. The Crimean Bridge wasn't just an engineering project, it was a symbol of pride and control. When it's damaged repeatedly, it erodes confidence in the government's ability to protect key assets. Russian media has tried to spin it as a temporary inconvenience, but the repeated strikes and visible damage make that narrative less convincing each time. Meanwhile, Ukraine has capitalized on these symbolic victories. Every successful hit is widely publicized, showing that no Russian stronghold is beyond reach. This boosts morale domestically and reassures allies that support is paying off. In the information war, the image of a broken bridge carries immense power. So, what can Russia do next? The most obvious step is to increase protection for its supply lines. That means deploying air defenses, building decoys, and fortifying transport hubs. But protection alone doesn't solve the underlying problem of distance and vulnerability. The more Russia invests in defending logistics, the less it can invest in offense. It's a strategic trade-off that constrains options. Russia could also attempt to establish new supply corridors through the occupied territories. However, that requires territorial stability, something hard to guarantee amid ongoing fighting. Building or repairing major infrastructure in contested zones is nearly impossible without constant risk of attack. Even if new roads or rail lines are constructed, they could be destroyed just as quickly. Another possibility is to rely more heavily on maritime transport across the Black Sea or the Sea of Azov. But that, too, carries risks. Ukrainian sea drones and anti-ship missiles have already proven effective in targeting Russian vessels. The Russian Navy can't guarantee complete safety for transport ships, especially close to the Ukrainian coast. Maritime routes might provide partial relief, but they can't replace the capacity of a functioning land bridge. Long-term, the situation forces Russia to confront the limits of its logistical capacity. Even if it can stabilize some supply lines, the efficiency gap will remain. The war is consuming resources faster than they can be replaced. With sanctions restricting access to high-quality parts, technology, and funding, the strain on Russia's military industrial system will only grow. On the political front, this logistics crisis could influence internal dynamics. Regional governors, military leaders, and industrial managers all have stakes in the supply system. When failures mount, blame starts circulating. History shows that prolonged logistical crises often lead to tension within the military hierarchy. Everyone wants to avoid responsibility for shortages and losses. From an international angle, this failure reinforces the image of a Russia struggling to sustain a modern war. For NATO and Ukraine's partners, it's confirmation that sustained pressure works. For countries that have remained neutral or sympathetic to Russia, it's a reminder that Moscow's strength has limits. The myth of invincibility weakens every time a bridge collapses or a convoy burns. At this stage, the key question is whether Russia can adapt quickly enough to avoid larger setbacks. The longer the supply bottleneck persists, the greater the risk of stagnation at the front. Stalled logistics often lead to stalled offensives, and stalled offensives can lead to political fatigue. If Russia's leaders can't demonstrate progress, maintaining domestic support becomes harder. For Ukraine, success here doesn't mean the war is over, but it does mean leverage. Every disruption buys time. Every damaged bridge makes the next counteroffensive easier. The logic is simple. When your enemy spends more energy moving supplies than fighting, you're already winning the long game. In military history, logistics failures have ended campaigns more often than direct defeats. Napoleon's army froze in Russia not just because of the cold, but because of broken supply lines. Germany's war machine in World War II slowed when it ran out of fuel. In every age, the side that underestimates logistics pays a heavy price. Russia now finds itself in that same trap. Ultimately, the land bridge failure is more than a technical problem, it's a strategic turning point. It exposes the fragility of Russia's war infrastructure and the effectiveness of Ukraine's asymmetric strategy. It reshapes the balance of power, not through dramatic battles, but through steady attrition of capacity. As this crisis unfolds, one thing becomes clear. Wars are not won only by firepower. They're won by the ability to keep that firepower fed, fueled, and moving. Russia's struggle to maintain its logistics under constant attack is a reminder that modern warfare is as much about engineering, planning, and endurance as it is about courage and weapons. In the coming months, analysts will watch how Russia responds. Will it manage to restore the corridor, or will it settle for slower, riskier routes? Will it shift strategy toward defense, or double down with costly offensives? These decisions will shape not just the outcome of battles, but the overall direction of the war. For now, the message is simple. The land bridge failure has turned into a logistical nightmare that Russia cannot easily wake up from. The system that once fed its forces has become a choke point, and every attempt to fix it opens new vulnerabilities. The more it struggles to maintain control, the more exposed it becomes. Thank you all for watching. If you found this deep dive helpful, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more analyses like this, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Russia can rebuild its logistics, or has this failure marked a turning point in the war? I'd love to hear your perspective. Until next time, stay informed and stay curious.